Welcome to Impact OC, the only program showcasing the people and organizations shaping Orange County. With your host, Don Camber.
Hello, live from the OC Talk Radio studios at UCI's Beal Applied Innovation Center. I'm OC Talk Radio Public Affairs Director Don Camber with another great guest impacting our community in a positive way. Today, I welcome Underground Grit Co-Executive Director, licensed clinical social worker Crystal Anthony. The organization provides innovative avenues to incarcerated and formerly incarcerated men, women, and youth to transform their personal narrative from a story of incarceration and recidivism to one of redemption and healing. Thank you, Crystal, for being on Impact OC.
Thank you for having me here today.
Crystal, you and Co-Executive Director, licensed clinical social worker Suzanne Campbell created Underground Grit. Please explain why and what you hope to accomplish with your clients.
So we created Underground Grit in 2019, but I had actually met Suzanne in 2016. And I was working inside of the detention facility as a therapist, and she was working at a nonprofit, and I would bring in people into the facility to provide services and mentorship and care for the kids inside. It was kind of just like part of the plan. At that time, kids were still being tried as adults, and so they weren't getting out. Those kids that we were specifically working with and targeting, they weren't getting out. And so, but in 2016, a big law that passed was Prop 57, and by 2017, kids started getting released and getting out, and Suzanne was basically like an extension of my heartbeat in the community. The relationships that I had built with these kids over the period of 2 to 4 years with them, they now were being released back into the community and needed a me outside in the community. And at that time, once they were released, I wouldn't be able to have any contact with them. And so Suzanne kind of became like that bridge. I would actually have her come in, meet with the kids before they were released, and kind of, she would be like their helper on the outside. In the midst of that, we saw huge gaps in the system, not only just for helping our kids in the community, but they were going right back to the same communities that were bringing them into incarceration. And so we started seeing that there needed to be some changes and some shifts as to how we got kids into transitional housing or sober livings or programs that were going to benefit them to kind of re-enter back into the community. And at that time, there really wasn't enough of that. And there wasn't a ton of engagement within the court system. And so we saw that attending court with kids was a big deal, because we could tell the other side of the story of a report that only shared certain things. And so we started sharing about other things that they were working on and other things that they were achieving while they were working with us. And so by 2019, I left the county and Suzanne left that nonprofit, and we started breaking systems and breaking them down and kind of questioning some of the ways that things were getting done here, and specifically in Orange County. And we worked alongside the courts to kind of create another bigger court system that provided more rehabilitative efforts towards violent offenders, young people that committed violent offenses, but treating them with care and trauma-informed services so that they wouldn't recidivate back into incarceration.
Can you explain what Prop 57 was that prompted you to even start Underground Grit?
So in the early 2000s, a Proposition 21 had passed, and that basically gave power to the district attorney's offices in the state of California to direct file youth into straight into going into the adult court system. So you could be a 15-year-old or a 14-year-old and you were going into the adult system. And we had kids that had been first time offenders. They had never offended, they'd never been on probation, they'd never had any issues in the past, but because they committed a crime, they weren't even given a hearing or anything like that. They were able to skip that and go straight into the adult court system. So you had 15-year-olds going to adult court, fighting life sentences. And so Prop 57 shifted that. It saw that that was not the way that rehabilitation actually happens. It saw that, it looked at the brain and the science behind it and crimes and things like that. And so it really shifted Orange County, because in Orange County, you would go into 2 different units and it was full of kids that were all being tried as adults. for me, when I was a therapist inside, it was shocking. I had worked with human trafficking victims. I had worked in a different world on the victim side of things, and I'd worked with alongside law enforcement and the FBI and Department of Homeland Security. And I saw such a different picture now with these boys. And mostly it was boys that were incarcerated and being tried as adults. And so I saw there was like gaps there. There was obvious resources that were not being provided to them in the community, and the community and all of us were failing them out here. And so, but they were getting treated as if like, hey, you've had all these resources and now you're going to get tried as an adult, which really wasn't the situation. But when Prop 57 passed, it brought a wave of hope into the institution. It was like, hey, you might be getting a second chance. You're going to get another hearing that's going to say whether or not you should be tried as a juvenile or as an adult. And that was one of the pieces of Prop 57. Prop 57 is a big law, but that was one of the key pieces that impacted us with creating underground grit, or it was like the beginnings at the time when Prop 57 passed. Underground grit, that we weren't even thinking about it yet, but we started seeing it when our kids then were getting released back into the community. They were getting released, and then within 3 weeks they would reoffend, and you had systems, whether it's law enforcement or it was through the different departments, that believed these kids deserved life sentences. And so instead of treating them with love and care when they came out into the community, after they built trust with probation officers inside of facilities, they were coming out and they were being treated like monsters. And so you have the old mentality and old school of thinking that these are monsters. And then the reality is that these are children, they're kids. And it's like shifting those mindsets and changing systems in a bigger way, and standing up against those systems, saying like what you're doing is not correct, and what you're doing is actually harming community safety. It's harming, we talk about public safety. It's harming that. You're not helping somebody do better is going to protect the community better. Putting somebody right back into the same community, the same systems, that's going to cause more violence, So it's like, how are we shifting that narrative for our community?
So what services were offered that you felt needed to be changed?
So when I first, I'll talk a little bit about like just going into the facility as a whole. When I first went into the facility, therapy was really not a thing. It was like kids were in there for a year or two and they were not doing therapy. I had come from, I'm from San Diego, and I had come from San Diego where I had worked to create a program for human trafficking victims down there. And I had learned about like the best therapies. I had learned about holistic medicine. I had learned about all these different things that my girls taught me. My girls down there taught me, and they like schooled me on like how certain thing just doesn't work. Like I would take my girls to therapy and they're like, this is not working for me. Like I'm not getting better. I'm just talking about the same thing every time I come. And I'm like, you know what? I don't know what to do, but I'm going to Google it. And I literally would like Google like, what is the best therapy for trauma? And I would find things like yoga. I would find things like Reiki and energy healing. And I found something called EMDR, which is a very specialized trauma treatment therapy that's super expensive and hard to reach for our impoverished communities. And so I was like outraged, and yet not, because then when it came to human trafficking victims, everybody wanted to raise their hand and say like, I'll help. I'll provide a free session. I'll do this. I'll do that. When I came into the facility, it wasn't that there wasn't like the help. It was that there was a mentality of like, these kids are like the throwaway kids of the detention facility because they're all going to go to prison. So why are we wasting resources and time on kids that are just going to state prison? That was truly what it was. And I remember going to my supervisor at the time and I'd be like, can I take over this unit? Because I started running like a group in there, and it was a human trafficking group about teaching them how not to pimp girls out, basically. And, it's silly, but it wasn't silly. It was like a really great group, actually. And we had like a carne asada, like carne asada fry party at the very end. And I gave them certificates, and it was like a little graduation and stuff. And it was like a big deal. And I remember giving them like the Homeboy Industries book from like Father G, and like the mentality then was like, well, who bought those books? Like, that's what I would get from staff. It was like, who bought those books? I'm like, well, I got them donated. Yeah, I'm not a nonprofit, but I got them donated from my friends and family that decided to want to give books to the kids I work with. Oh, okay. Well, you're not buying them, right? But that was like the mentality. It was like, why are you doing these things for these kids? And so slowly those boys were like, can you come in and can you be my therapist? And I'm like, okay, well, I have to ask permission. So then I'd start asking permission. The other therapists would be like, yeah, you can have that kid on my caseload. I don't see him or whatever. And slowly I just started asking my boss, can I please take over that unit? I'll still do all the other stuff you want me to do with the human trafficking stuff, but I want to work with these kids. These kids are here for a long time. Let's just try to do something. The unit supervisor at the time, he's still the supervisor there, but he was incredible. Like, he was like, anything you want to do in this unit, if you want to do programs, you want to do stuff, tell me and we'll make it happen. And that's literally what happened. My boss gave me the unit. I created like a little scheduler, a planner of like people I was going to start bringing in, started getting people cleared to come into the facility. I was bringing in
Where is the facility?
It's in Orange. And so we brought in, I brought in Homeboy Industries. I brought in like programs from San Diego County. I was bringing in like different people. That's how I met Suzanne. I brought in that program that she was part of. And it was like one of those things where it was like, I really didn't know exactly what I was doing, but I was like, we're going to do something here. I became like a yoga teacher. I was like, we're going to do yoga in here. Staff would bring the kids. They were awesome. Like the staff that really supported the work I was doing, they were like, well, where do you want to do yoga? I'm like, well, can we go outside? Because it's like in the evening and that way they can be outside. And we would go outside and do yoga. I became like Reiki certified, and so I was doing energy healing with them in the inside. They were like, you're being out of control. But I would bring in like essential oils. The boys would be like, can I please do like lavender, but a little bit of like, and then they'd pick like what oil they wanted. I was doing things that I don't believe were necessarily innovative, but it was just I was doing it. And the reality is that lots of things heal kids, and it's not always just therapy. We were doing like art. We would do like art projects. That was a huge deal. It was like they never got to give gifts to their families. I was like, let's do a Mother's Day project. Father's Day, maybe not so much, but we would just do it just for fun. I'd make it like a second Mother's Day gift, basically, because a lot of our kids didn't have dads, so they had moms, or they had a grandma, or they had somebody else that took care of them, that raised them. And just started shifting it. I mean, I made therapy be a normal thing in that unit. It was like, no, you are seeing a therapist weekly. You are getting checked in, like being checked up on. Art projects should be the norm in here. Therapy and yoga and all of those things should be normal. I was the first therapist to be allowed to do EMDR in the facility because
What is EMDR?
it's the trauma treatment. So it's a specialized trauma treatment that, to be quite honest, for one session can cost like up to $175 for like an hour. That shifted in the system. It was like, okay, Crystal can't do EMDR for everybody, so we have to get more therapists trained. More therapists got trained. I feel like it was like teaching people that there's other methods of healing, teaching people and believing that holistic medicine and holistic healing is a real thing. And so I think when we were creating Underground Grit, it was like taking some of those methods and saying, okay, we can't do everything, but let's have that be part of our program. We can bring in people to do that stuff, because now we're going to be outside. Now we're going to be able to bring in like people to volunteer their time to do it for us. So we have like acupuncture at Underground Grit. We have Reiki. Even through COVID, we had those things, like, because you could do distance Reiki and you can do distance healing and things like that. We have the EMDR stuff. And we do a lot of things that are not your normal practice of therapy. It's like we go to the beach. We do things that are not necessarily always in an office space. It's like, you know what? Therapy is not always in an office.
And the goal of the services are
To heal, right? To do actual healing from the inside out. Because people can appear to be great on the outside, but be broken on the inside. You can have a job, but if you're not healed on the inside, you're going to fall back to old patterns with substances. You're going to fall back to old patterns that will break you at some point. And so I think for us, it's like healing and mental health was like the big piece, right? You have two social workers that, we're pretty badass. Like, I'm not going to lie. And we believe that healing is a key piece, but it's like, not just because we're women either. It's like, no, we see what happens with our broken children and our broken boys and girls. And when you don't provide medicine, basically outside of like psychiatric medicine, like pills and stuff like that, I'm talking like healing through other methods. It's like you see the brokenness that can happen after, you can see how somebody can go right back into their old habits and stuff like that. So I think for us, it's like healing is a big piece. Obviously helping our kids re-enter back into the community. So employment, right? Getting them back on their feet, getting them clothes. Some of our kids and young people and adults that come back from state prison or wherever it may be, they don't fit into the clothes that they went in with. And some of their families, like got rid of it. Let's just start with that. Like if they thought you were going to go to prison for the rest of your life, your clothes probably are not there anymore. So it was like, that was a big thing. I think we noticed that there was gaps when I was still inside and Suzanne was outside helping kids when they got out. It's like we had kids that were there for 3 years, and why do they not have an ID? Why do they not have a birth certificate? Why have they not worked on getting their social security card while they've been in custody? We're working with juveniles. Even in the state prison system, they leave with a birth certificate, they leave with an ID, they leave with all these basic, they leave even with their school transcripts in prison, okay? So why are we not able to always do that for our kids inside? So that was like gaps, and having to go to court and be like, can we please take a kid to go get his ID? Can we please take a kid to the beach? Can we do furloughs? Can we do different things? Once Underground Grit was created, we really partnered with other organizations. We believe that not one organization can fix everything or make everything better. We believe that we're stronger by numbers and not just by one org thinking they can do everything. And so we knew what our strengths were and our weaknesses. And so we worked with different organizations. We had Initiate Justice as an organization in LA County, and they admitted 2 of our young people while they were incarcerated, applied to be part of their academy for policy team. And these 2 kids got to go to Sacramento while incarcerated. And it was through our court system and we had to fight for that type of stuff. We had to fight to be able to do that. But it was the most rewarding thing because these 2 young people had never, ever been outside of Orange County. They had never, ever gone to Sacramento and had to go talk about legislation and why it's important and talk to politicians and things like that. And it was they had to do a weekly meeting that they attended and things like that. I mean, those are the things that I think it was is that innovative, or is that just us fighting for something that we know is right? Is that us just saying hey, this is something that not only do they deserve, but it makes us better. It makes all of us better. So that was a big thing. We had, just little things, but the big things, right? It's getting those IDs before they get released. Well, now you're more likely to get a job much faster. Now you have your social security card. You have all the things that you need as an employee, because you can't get employed without those basics.
How did you come up with Underground Grit?
So Underground, so prior to Underground Grit being created, we had these very secret meetings at Suzanne's house. I don't even want to call them secret. It was just kind of breaking the rules. When kids would get released and leave, I wasn't able to have contact with them. And so these are kids I've known for years now. And towards the end of my time at the county, I was a little bit, I don't care. And so Suzanne and I were let's do an art day at your house. And we had our kids that were out all come to her house, and we had a big potluck type of thing, and they got to do art, and they got to do just fun time with each other as brothers. And we would have these meetings once a month, and in the midst of all of that, it was we're going to start a nonprofit, and they were part of the creation of it. And we would call our meetings we would always say they were underground. And so we knew that the word underground needed to be part of our title or our
how did grit come?
And then it was finding that second word was harder than you think, because everything sounded stupid. And I think we were looking at different words that would represent our young people. So you finally
came up with grit.
Yes.
Thank you, Underground Grit Co-Executive Director, Licensed Clinical Social Worker Crystal Anthony, for being on Impact OC. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I'm OC Talk Radio Public Affairs Director Dawn Camber. Have an impactful day.
You've been listening to Impact OC, the only program showcasing the people and organizations shaping our community. Right here on Orange County's only community radio station, OC Talk Radio.